Right, now the digital floor to Christos Karaolis, President of the National Federation of Cypriots UK, partner Bain and Company.
Oxygono and Xenox for organising the forum and putting the issue of the diaspora at the front and centre of it. I'd also like to thank my good friend, the Presidential Commissioner, for his kind words about the diaspora. The Cypriot diaspora is about 500,000 strong. And whilst the majority are in the UK, there are significant populations that live in Australia, the USA, Greece, Canada, South Africa, across Europe, and across Africa. As a diaspora, we've reached all the corners of the world. And as a diaspora, we're increasingly transitioning from the first generation of refugees and migrants who worked in secondary industries to second, third, and fourth generation Cypriots who work in the tertiary sector. Now, that doesn't mean that we will or need to forget our roots, our culture, our homeland, or indeed our national cause. In fact, if we harness that potential properly, the diaspora can be even more powerful for Cyprus. Today, I'm proud to be joined by a distinguished panel of diaspora Cypriots to discuss this very issue. So joining me on the panel is Bambos Charalambous, the member of the UK Parliament for Enfield and Southgate, Katerina Theophanous, the member of the Victoria Parliament for Northcote, Andreas Papaevripides, the president of POMAK, Endy Zemenides, the executive director of the Hellenic American Leadership Council, Stavrou, the general secretary of NEPOMAK, and Aristos Constantine, the trade commissioner for the Republic of Cyprus in North America. So without further ado, I'd like to turn to my first question. What do you see as the relationship between the diaspora and Cyprus in 50 years' time? And what opportunities does that transition from the first to the second and third generation present in terms of that relationship? Bambo, let's start with you.
Thank you, Christos, and it's a pleasure to be on this panel having this discussion. I think it's a very important one. I'm very optimistic about the future. I think they say if you know your past, you'll know your future. And certainly when my parents came to the UK in the 1960s, it was a very different setting then. So they worked in the rag trade, they worked in manual labour jobs. Those jobs are very different now as we're looking forward to the future. And so the diaspora has progressed. The diaspora has become a lot better educated, and I think that's quite promising for the future. And the fact we're having this discussion via Zoom also shows what the prospects are for the future. I think that brings us closer together as a diaspora with Cyprus. So I'm very convinced that we'll continue to have good trade, travel, relationship with Cyprus. We'll share our experiences. They will develop. So I think we also need to make sure that we celebrate our role models. So we have some distinguished people who have done incredible things in our community, and we need to build on that, but also share the great knowledge and wealth of our experience with the diaspora, with Cyprus, and make sure that we keep our cultural identity and our traditions, celebrate them, but also make sure there's a strong dialogue, communication. So I'm very optimistic for the future, and I think with technology and the way things are developing, and our role in our respective countries, we will do very well.
Thank you, Bam. I think, as you say, having role models is really important, and you know, your election to the British Parliament showcases that for the community here in the UK. We're also really proud to have Katerina Theophanous, an Australian parliamentarian, with us. So, Katerina, your thoughts on the same question?
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to the discussion all the way from Australia. I think in order to get a sense of what the diaspora will look like in 50 years' time, it's important to understand what it looks like now. And Australia and Victoria in particular is home to one of the largest Greek and Cypriot diasporas around the world. And most of them, like my parents, came over during the 50s and 60s after World War II. And the village life that their families left behind was hugely different to what they found here. Many set foot here not knowing a word of English and struggled to settle in, but they worked hard, and in just one generation, so much has changed. We've seen this country embrace us, and we've seen our culture become enmeshed in the culture in Australia. We've seen children from those migrant boats grow up and become leaders in our nation, in business, in academics, in politics. And now only 1/3 of the diaspora in Australia were born in the homeland, and the rest, like me, were born here. And we're entering those 3rd and 4th generations now, but still that link with our Cypriot culture and heritage is strong. And my generation have been fortunate to grow up in a time in Australia where multiculturalism has been celebrated and promoted. It hasn't always been that way. This has meant that we've benefited from being able to express our culture with the wider community. But that sense of longing that my parents and grandparents feel, that it's not the same for the 2nd and 3rd generations, that we've shifted psychologically. Our relationship with Cyprus has shifted, and we know and love our Cypriot heritage, but we don't feel that same sense of loss, I suppose. And more, I think we relate to our heritage as an asset that brings depth and opportunity, because the truth is that the Cyprus that they knew isn't the Cyprus of today, and so it can't be the Cyprus of our experience as a diaspora. So as a 2nd generation Cypriot with 2 daughters who are 3rd generation and mixed background, I'm interested in celebrating not just the past, but the future of Cyprus and Australia. And I want my daughters to know their heritage and learn the language, yes, but without a tangible connection in their own lifetime, without real experiences and opportunities, those things will only ever be abstract. So what I'm interested in is how we can leverage our shared heritage to create a new and interesting connection and opportunities. In other words, how can my own daughter's experience of Cyprus move beyond a beautiful beach holiday? It's a difficult question to answer, but I think that as the previous speaker said, that technology will play a big role.
Thank you, Kat. As you say, it's one of the challenges that I think that globally we've all been tackling. And I mean, with that, Andrea, you've seen the diaspora movement for a number of years, so kind of very keen to hear your thoughts on this issue as well.
Well, first of all, I endorse the protocol as Christos laid it down, thanking the organizers and whoever is participating in this very interesting debate and debates today. When he set the clock, Christos, in 50 years, by that time I'll probably be looking from above, or in the best scenario, probably working with 2 sticks. But nevertheless, on a serious note, I think what our diaspora would look like in 50 years, it will all depend on the efforts of all our communities, the Cypriot diaspora, and where the foundations from now have been laid down and are carried forward, obviously. I have no doubts that what we have built so far will be continued and thrive through the years. In all my speeches in the past 2 or 3 years, I always say 2 or 3 things which are very important, and I think they're actually the essence of the way forward. One is to continuously, rigorously engage the youth and give them the opportunities to actually get involved in our communities. I see that the 2 pillars of which can guarantee us success is our Greek Orthodox Church, which is very organized abroad. I mean, if you consider, for instance, the UK, we have about 123 Orthodox churches all over the UK. I think that's quite an achievement. And where you have the church, you have communities, and you achieve what you're trying to do because you get people involved. Also, the second pillar, I will see the our Greek community schools. I know it's a huge task to preserve them even in this form they are in now. But if the governments of Cyprus and Greece, because we have to acknowledge, obviously, there is a lot of movement, at least in the UK, but obviously in the US, where is even much larger the Greek community compared to the Cypriot community. I believe this will actually be something the government should look at in reinforcing the schools with personnel who will come from the respective countries and maintain a good standard of education for our children and the grandchildren and so on. Also, we need support in other levels. So, let's hope the Cyprus problem is involved, which obviously will release for all of us a lot of a lot of energy and time to actually spend on these issues, so we can maintain, for the benefit of Cyprus and Greece, these communities abroad, which will be of an enormous help for Cyprus and Greece. I speak to Greece because I see us as belonging to the same nation, and obviously we have abroad, we have the same problems. We work alongside on all national issues and everything else which arises. It's a good opportunity now because our youth are taking over organized communities, and also they have in their hands something called today's technology, which obviously the people who came back in the 60s and work in the hardest jobs you can imagine, obviously this our youth now, they have technology in their hands, communication, it's easy to achieve, and this will make sure that these objectives will be fulfilled.
Thank you, Andrea. Next, I'd love to turn to Endy. Endy, what you've built with HALC is a movement from nothing, really, and you've managed to grow that and engage the younger generation. So would love to hear your perspectives on how you see that transition and how you've made it work in terms of engaging.
Well, you know, I'm by nature an optimist. Obviously, what you're talking about, the what we've done with HALC, but I am a little less sanguine than some of my previous speakers here, because I'm not sure we're on about the challenges we have. I agree with Andreas that the church and the schools have been the fundamentals of how we built the communities up to now. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but at least in the US, we have historic lows in attendance in both the church and in Greek schools. We have, when we talk about a Cypriot diaspora as well, we have to be aware of that there is not much Cypriot to Cypriot marriage anymore, right? So and that's not only among Cypriots. There's, it used to be everybody from Greek descent used to be marrying someone from their same region or their same chorio, right? So there's more of a pan-Hellenic identity, and that's something that the Cypriot diaspora policy should adjust to. In our church, 85% of marriages of recent years have been with non-Greek Orthodox. So again, there's challenges here, but there are also opportunities, because you could create Philhellenes or lovers of Cyprus from people who didn't even know where Cyprus was before. But when we talk about technology and institutions, one of the things that we do, we go where people are, right? We try to make ourselves relevant, not only in their cultural life, but in their civic life, and not only on our national issues, in their professional life. And if we don't learn, and I've worked with Aristos on that. There are tremendous Cypriots that are not involved in the organized Cypriot community, but you go and you talk to them about one of the great innovators in our AI and blockchain right now is a young Greek Cypriot, is a member of our organization. The guy who came up with Translate.com had never been involved, but we talked to him. We got him involved in kind of seeing Cyprus and Greece as a business opportunity. He's investing in Greece. He helped promote Prime Minister Tsipras's trip to Chicago a few years ago and get young presidents, the YPO, to meet with him. But we went to where he is. We didn't say, you have to come here. And this is something that we really should specifically look to do, especially during this great disruption that COVID has. Because the model that we followed of galas and dinner dances and day-long conferences, that's not coming back for a while.
Thank you, Endy. A couple of people have spoken about the importance of youth. So I'd love to hear George's perspective as General Secretary of NEPOMAK. What are you seeing and hearing on the ground? And where do you think the diaspora is going? And to Andy's point, let's talk about some of the challenges as well as the opportunities.
Thank you, Christos. So I would like to start off with saying that I too am optimistic. As more time passes, obviously, the diaspora will certainly become more integrated in the countries we live in, which, yes, presents challenges as we move further from knowing the Cyprus our parents and grandparents knew. But I feel like my experience is special because while I agree with Endy, I did have a strong Cypriot community in addition to the Greek community growing up. And so being a first-generation American whose parents were refugees, but also having friends who are second and third generation, a little bit more removed, I agree having that one-on-one connection with the Cypriot community was exactly what molded me and my peers and set us up to have that stronger connection with Cyprus. And also, which then made me excited to join POMAK when I turned 18 years old. So I think that focusing on empowering the younger generation, like Andreas said earlier too, is really important. And we have to change our perception of the organized diaspora. So making it more modern and relevant, tailoring our aims and objectives to the younger generation and making people want to get involved from a younger age. For me, I feel like it's that spark when you're making friends and you feel connected on a personal level, you're then excited and empowered to be more involved on other levels. People have many different interests, and I think there's different ways to support the Cyprus we know and love, whether it is through organizations like HELC and supporting Endy, or whether it's more cultural and social events. I think those are all really important ways to keep Cyprus alive and strengthen the diaspora community.
George, you made a great point about the reshaping of the diaspora, and I think certainly what we're seeing in the UK is a growing number of associations that are focused on professional networks. So Cypriots in the City, Cyprus Medical Society, we're starting to see those emerge, and they too are kind of getting involved in the organised diaspora. So it's great to see that reshaping is happening everywhere. Aristos, turning to you, you have a unique perspective from both the UK and your time in the US. So really interested to hear your thoughts on the diaspora's future ahead. You're on mute, Aristos, I think.
Sorry. Καλημέρα από τη Νέα Υόρκη. Και πρωτού μπούμε στο θέμα στα αγγλικά, θα ήθελα πολύ σύντομα να εκφράσω τα θερμά μου συγχαρητήρια σε όλους όσοι συνείσφεραν στη διοργάνωση του φόρουμ, αλλά ιδιαίτερα στο φίλο Νίκολα Κυριακίδη, ο οποίος μόλις πριν ένα χρόνο με είχε επισκεφθεί στο γραφείο μου για να μιλήσουμε για το όρομα του και να είμαστε σήμερα εδώ. Μπράβο, Νίκο. So, just I'm going to concur, I think, with Katerina and Endy that, 50 years is a long time. And while we can probably make some assumptions, I think we should be more concerned about what the diaspora looks like today. and whether or not we actually fully understand it. Again, as Endy said and Katerina alluded to, it is no longer a homogeneous group, as it may have been decades past. And I think it's a mistake to treat it as such. And their relation with Cyprus 50 years from now or 5 years from now will depend on, to a significant degree, on how we identify with and engage with the diaspora, and in what areas. So I'll echo what has already been said, in that particularly in the business and investment areas, that is something that Endy and I have worked extensively, and I work very closely with the Cyprus US Chamber of Commerce as well, which is very active, as well as many Hellenic organizations, which, as Endy said, and we have this overlap with the Greek body here, because they are 2 million strong, whereas the Cypriot diaspora in the US is only about 60,000. So, the efforts largely have been, at least coming from Cyprus, have been focused on cultural, language, and political matters. And that's not a bad thing. That's good. We've actually been very successful in those areas. But if we want to continue to foster closer ties going forward, then we have to engage the diaspora on a business, economic, and professional level, because we have some amazing people. Amazing business people, leaders in the corporate sector that have to date not been directly engaged, because we don't really have a framework where information and strategy can be developed with a local context and towards mutual benefit. So we need to help them help us. And as Endy said, we need to go to them. It's not about getting them to come to us, right? And that means identifying goals and mapping the diaspora and cultivating a targeted and more sort of sophisticated means of communication. And, that means playing a dual role, right? Both facilitating their potential contributions to Cyprus, but also serving them, providing them with that comfort level to advocate for us, right? Now, like I said, there are many factors that affect the makeup of the diaspora. The brain drain after the financial crisis changed the diaspora in some places to a significant degree, but it shifts according to many things: immigration policies, macroeconomics, and even as I said, the economic performance in Cyprus and the opportunities they have. So, I don't think we should worry too much about the makeup of the diaspora, but in going forward, because it will undoubtedly change. And the diaspora will, as we go into second and third generation, and as we have people marrying non-Cypriots or non-Greeks, that doesn't necessarily mean, however, that they lose their identity or or that they value their connection with Cyprus any less. It just means that you have to our narrative has to adjust to be easily embraced by them.
I think one thing I would say is there's an interesting dynamic and slight difference actually between what we observe in the US versus the UK, where in the US, the Cypriot diaspora, and potentially actually in Australia, the Cypriot diaspora is much more part of a broader Greek and Hellenic diaspora just because of the numbers. In the UK, it's actually almost the inverse. There are kind of 350,000 Cypriots and about 120,000 Greeks. And that has only increased in the last 5 years. Prior to that, it was about 30,000 Greeks. Mm-hmm. So there is a very interesting dynamic that I do think, as we think about diaspora engagement, does need to be tailored to each home market.